So great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out. And I want to begin our conversation looking at the calendar. It's March of 2024. 4 years ago, the world came to a stop. How did you get through that COVID time period, and how did it change you?
Well, I have to say, looking back, it seems I have a writer friend and former MFA advisor who loves the word irreality. And to me, looking back, it seems almost impossible to believe it happened. Just a little funny story was I was getting a box of tissues from my garage, and I had ordered like 36 boxes of tissues um, during the pandemic because we couldn't find toilet paper, if you remember. And as soon as I grabbed the box, I thought, oh my God, this is so like, did that really happen? And we were fortunate in the sense that, well, for one thing, I'm a writer, so I spent a lot of time by myself anyhow.
Yeah.
And my kids at the time were both I was living in the Philly area, and my kids were both there. And so we formed sort of a family pod, and we were not completely isolated. But the other interesting thing, another thing that seems unreal, is I come from an Italian family, and we get together all the time for anything. And we did not see each other for a year and a half during that time. And we finally got together in July of 22. And my sister wasn't feeling totally well. She was hosting. And turns out she had COVID. We
Oh no.
all got COVID. So I mean, we none of us got terribly ill,
Yeah.
but because by that able to avoid everything at all times. You just can't stay isolated.
Yeah.
I think we found out how much of an impact it had, I think, particularly on kids and young adults, more so than me. I mean, I'm 65 and I have a husband, and, I have a job that mostly keeps me at home. But the kids, and even my kids who were in their early 30s, or in their late 20s, it hugely affected their social life. I mean, there's only so much you can do in Zoom. It's just not the same thing as going out with people. Um, and the negative impact it had on school age kids, or even kids who are in college. I talk to some kids now who, I say kids, they're in their 20s, who, spend several years of their college experience on Zoom
Yep.
experience. And then, of course, I also had a father-in-law. He was the last of the four of that generation. My parents had already died, and my dad had died. And he was in a nursing home. We couldn't visit him, and he died during the pandemic. And my sister-in-law was able to get 1 hour with him right at the end of his life. So all those kinds of things just, stay with you.
Yeah. They
Yeah.
certainly do. So let me ask you this. Let me get to the heart and soul of what you do for a living. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders. It's career day. One of the kids asks you, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
That's interesting because I actually used to do a program for a year where I went into elementary schools, and kids actually asked me that
Yeah.
question. I think kids are, if they say, what is writing, they understand that you sit down and you write. What I find interesting about that age group in particular is they'll write anything. They are not restricted by the kinds of things that start haunting people not too much later. I'd say sixth, seventh, eighth grade, you start thinking about, did I cross every T and dot every I? I love reading stories. I remember my son, when he was 7 and 8, they used to do these little books that the librarian would bind like a real book. And they were so proud of these things. And I kept my son's books. He's now 32, and I read it to him one day, and he just shook his head. He's like, how stupid is that? And I said, no, actually, it's, about, I don't, completely fantastical story.
Yeah.
that doesn't worry about if this could happen, or that it wasn't punctuated perfectly, or that the drawings, because they had to draw too, uh, were very childish. It's just this exuberance that comes through in those kind of stories that, it's kind of cliche to say, but you do tend to lose it as that editor in your head says, well, you can't really write that, or you can't say that, or that could never really happen, that kind of thing. So I would just tell them, try to hold on to how you approach writing as a 8-year-old,
Yeah.
which I know will be impossible for them to do. But
But maybe
we
one of
say,
them, yeah, maybe one of them will retain it. So what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream?
a writer.
Okay. So you're living your
My
dream.
we kind of, yeah. I mean, it's not everything I expected. I think you have, well, let me just say, when I was very young, I grew up in an Italian family. I had a mother and an uncle who would talk partly in Italian and partly in English. The Italian was when they didn't want us to know what they were talking
Uh-huh.
about.
Yeah.
But the stories were just incredible. And I would go down. My mom had been a secretary before she got married, and she had an old Remington typewriter, which I still have mounted in my on my bookshelves, not here, but in another set of bookshelves. And I used to go down and just type these stories that they were talking about. And so I always had that idea I wanted to be a writer. The reason I say that it didn't, I think the actual, again, this could be the 7 and 8-year-old version where you don't worry about publication and marketing and all those other things that go along with writing that are not necessarily in the comfort zone of most writers. Maybe most writers I know would rather just sit alone than go out and do publicity or ask someone for a blurb or whatever it is. But the reality is also, I taught for 7 years in college and MFA programs, and I'll never forget. The students would write reviews of their teachers, and one of the students, this woman was about 20 at the time, and one of the things they were all 20, so I didn't know specifically who it was. It was anonymous, but the gist of her comment was she spends too much time on revision. I thought, I did take a class, later on. I would always share that story because I wasn't betraying anyone in particular. But most of writing, in my view, is revision. I mean,
Yeah.
to get it right. And I don't think, because we all use computers now and it looks pretty on the page, we think it's done, and so much is instantaneous. And people think, well, the first draft is the draft and is the final or is close to the final. And I don't think that that's true. And I think it's really hard, that the revision process, especially when you're not quite sure where it's going or if it's going to be what you want it to be. There's always that deformation from the mind to the page.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. To keep yourself going is, I think, really difficult. But I think the most eye-opening thing for me has been not only what a writer has to do to promote their work, but also what has changed. My first book came out in 2007, and now I have 2 books coming out this year. And what has changed in terms of the market, just the number of books. I think I read somewhere that there's 2 to 3 million books a year, including self-published books, which wasn't around in the aughts. And even the aughts, things were changing. And social media, it was really in its infancy when I started. Now it's the thing. And even social media changes. Like my daughter, who's 34, tells me, oh, no one goes on Facebook anymore. Only you boomers. And hopefully she won't watch this interview. But in any case, and then another person was telling me, no, it's TikTok videos now. You have
Yeah.
to do TikTok videos. You can't even do Instagram. That's still too old school.
Yeah.
And I think, oh my God.
Yeah. It's crazy.
I'm
Yeah.
ready for the blinking VCR. We
Yep.
tease my my mother and father, and now it's like, oh.
It's always midnight. Yeah. So let me ask you this. Who's been kind of a hero for you in your life, literary or otherwise?
Well, literary hero, I would have to say is A.S. Byatt, and she just passed away, in November. I would have loved to have met her.
Yeah.
And the reason I say her is just she had a long and somewhat difficult life. She lost a son who got killed walking home from school. A lot of her writing. And I think she lived to be 87. She was pretty old. She had a lot of success, but with that success, I think she had a failed marriage and issues with her sister and all that kind of stuff. So she had a lot of material. But the thing I loved about her writing when I discovered it, there are two books. One is called The Djinn in the Nightingale's Eye, and that is a book of fairy tales. And one of the things that she had written. I'd read Angela Carter, The Bloody Chamber, but hers are more are not so gruesome, I guess, as Angela Carter's. She had challenged writers either in the forward or afterward to write a fairy tale of their lives, which I did, and it's such a freeing form because you can just whatever that in my story one of the people lives 100 years, and I mean, people do live 100 years, but in any case, you could do a lot with that, with a basic idea. This mine had to do with beauty and aging. And it just so happens her other book that I love is Little Black Book of Stories. She has a story in there called A Stone Woman. And that's probably where I discovered her. That was in the New Yorker in 2003. And it is such a gorgeous story, magic realist. It's about a woman who loses her mother, and then she's turning, as you find out in the story, I won't go too far, but she's turning to stone. And so it deals with beauty and aging. There's this gorgeous moment where she's fled because she is happy, to say the least, with the way she looks. And I think she flees to Iceland, and she happens to run into a stonecutter, and she's very afraid. She's all covered up, and the stonecutter asks her to take off her jacket or whatever it is, and she starts taking off that jacket and thinking, this is a man. This man is going to, recoil or what have you. And his first word is beautiful. And I thought it's just such a moving moment. It's sort of toward the middle of the story, so I'm not giving away anything, but
Sure.
or maybe I am, but just the way it deals with in a magic realist way with beauty and death and aging and approaching death in a way that we all would hope, in a way that is accepting. It's sort of a magical way of thinking, but nevertheless, I write often in a magic realist mode. In fact, in The Last Whaler, which is the book coming out in September, there is a touch of it at the end, which some people might accept and some people might not. But I'm not going to give it away. But and there is a bit of that in Falling Through the New World in those stories. Some of them are very straightforward, realistic stories. Some of them are more stream of consciousness. People are dying or what have you. And you have to suspend disbelief. I think if the writer is successful, you don't care that these things could or could not have happened. The writer was unsuccessful, you just sort of are thrown out of the story, and that's it.
So let me ask you this. If you could meet one person alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating, who would it be?
This might not be the most popular answer, but I'd say probably Elon Musk.
It's the most popular one, actually. Everybody
Oh,
says that.
really? Oh,
Oh,
really?
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In my crowd, he's not the most popular person at the
Yeah.
moment, but I don't know. I find his story. I always assumed he was born to wealth and then just sort of like Trump became wealthier, but it turns out that's not his story. And I mean, he's very controversial. He says controversial things, but you have to sort of admire his chutzpah. He sending rockets into space,
Yep.
and um, taking over Twitter, now X, and in some ways, I think he really does feel like he is trying to preserve some of the freedom of speech that was eluding some of the social media platforms. He may not always be successful at it, but I do. There's so many issues around that right now with the Supreme Court trying to decide, if the government can censor speech for good or ill. That on social media, I just find him fascinating
Yeah.
person. So that's what I
Yeah.
have to say.
Yeah. So of all of these things that you've done in your life, what are you the proudest of?
I'd probably have to say having, husband, family. I've been married for, oh my gosh, almost 44 years.
Wow.
I got married when I was a child. I was 12. Just kidding.
It's a part of the book.
I did get married young, get married right out of college. It was not my plan, just happened. I have two great kids who are still somewhat trying to find their way. And I think their lives were quite disrupted by what happened. My daughter was preparing to be an opera singer. She had been doing it for many years and was sort of on the cusp of having a career, and then everything shut down. And my son was actually working as a journalist, and he decided, for a lot of reasons, that that's not what he wanted to do. And so some of it was good in the sense that people had to sort of sit still for a while. I've read a lot of stories where people, but for all the negative stories, there were also positive stories in people finding, reevaluating their lives and so forth. And so I would say that all my family still goes on, and I'm probably proudest of all the stuff we've been through and still keep going.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
yeah.
So, Cynthia, at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Who do I think I am?
Yeah,
Oh, wow, that's a hard question.
this is the therapy question.
If this doesn't sound too hokey, I am at heart a good person who tries to do the right thing. I think in some cases I err too much on the side of not trying to offend people, or um, I try to go out in the world and help people where I can. I've done volunteer work all my life, both some with extremely, let's say, impoverished people in Peru and Costa Rica, to, like, right now I'm on the board at a place called Malay House, which is Edna St. Vincent Malay's birthplace. And we're trying to develop programs that are inclusive, that are diverse, that bring in the community or communities that Edna might be proud of. She had kind of an interesting life too. So that's kind of how I see myself.
So, if anyone wants to get your previous book, learn more about the books that are coming out, anything about your world, where's the good place, the good news to go to?
The best place is my website, which is CynthiaReevesWriter.com. I had to add the writer because there was already a Cynthia
Uh,
Reeves,
yeah.
who, yeah. So CynthiaReevesWriter.com is the best place.
So, final question, what's your favorite book?
Aside from what I've already mentioned, probably The Road by Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah, I love
I
them.
love him. I love his books are dark, and that
Yeah.
book is extremely dark. And the movie that was made from that book is, I think, in some ways too dark. But what I loved about that book, aside from the writing, I think he's a fantastic writer, is at the heart, it's about a father and son, and anything that a father in this case, would do for a child. There's a scene, I think, where they're in a shelter, a cave, or blown out basement or something, and they find a can of Coke. The father finds it and gives it to his son.
Yeah.
And to me, that is the essence of what a great book should be about, even set against such a bleak and post-apocalyptic landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. Cynthia, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your story. Best of luck with the release of the next two. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.